Any questions? Any answers? I've planted quite a few different seeds. It can go in many other different directions. You may have your own ideas, anecdotes, and so forth. But some of you who have read my books, you know that I have, spent decades putting, some of these different things together, talking about the nature of time, karma, soul, and soulmate contracts, and so forth. I'm going to get into some of those in the afternoon workshop. But any things that you would like to ask here? Yes, David.
Since you've done a lot of hypnosis sessions, first let me ask, have you run into pre-birth planning with people as part of your work?
Yes, pre-birth planning. That's a very fascinating thing. And I got more information about that, as well as personal information about that, with the Michael Newton studies with the life between life work. And very fascinating, which really explains quite a few other interesting things that are part of our so-called normal life. And yes, we as souls, when we're not here upon the earth, we go into the spiritual world and we have our spiritual families. And then we have also the study groups in spirit. We have the great library in spirit. We can go into different cosmos and having experiences inside suns, inside planets. And if you're not limited by the body, by the corporeal third dimensional experience, if you're just a soul, yeah, you can go inside of a sun. You can go inside of a essential core of light and love and energy. And when we come back to the world and we choose these lives, then yeah, we practice, in the life presentation, life study place in spirit, the things that we're going to be doing. What is our mission? What do we want to do once we're here? Who are we going to interact with? Very likely it's going to be with our soul group that we have come in time and time again. And what lessons do we want to learn, etc. And yeah, so there's these wonderful discussions of people like practicing kind of a psychodrama sort of thing in spirit of, I'm going to be doing this and I'm going to be wearing this orange and purple outfit. I know that's unusual, but I'm going to be wearing that outfit, and that will be your sign, all this is in spirit, that's me. Let's meet. Yeah, and so that's how when people talk about like, when I first met my partner, it was like electricity, or it was like across the room, and our eyes grasped the hold of each other, or like, wow, that person here wearing that flower upon the lapel, that used to be common, it's not so common these days, and there it was. And that was the sign, that was the agreed upon sign in spirit that, yes, this is something that you're supposed to connect to. And then within a very short amount of time, those two people like, oh, I know you, this is familiar. How many of you have experienced things like that? Oh, yeah, well, great, most of you. It's really lovely and fascinating and spiritual that things like that happen. And yeah, it's practiced in spirit before we're incarnated. It keeps things lively. Laurel, did you have a...
Oh yeah, I'd love to hear some more stories about some of the sessions you've had with people that have been really remarkable, and maybe some of the lessons that journeying into between lives or past lives and how it served them.
Yeah, boy, that's really the fun stuff, as well as fascinating, all the different things that one can learn. I had a woman probably in her late late 40s, and she was still looking for her soulmate. And so she was very curious about that. When I get together with people, I have them write a list of the cast of characters, and those are people that we know, family, brothers, sisters, parents, and so forth, close friends, and so forth, because very likely you have been interacting with those people in other lives with different outfits, meaning bodies, and then you come in again and again. So I have them to, sign their forms, cast of characters, important people, and a couple of big questions. Well, her number one question, was, when will I meet my soulmate? And I'd really like to know pretty soon, so then I can divorce my husband. And so we have our sessions, and she has really interesting perspectives, and she did meet in the spiritual world. She met her soulmate, and she was like longing for that and saying, yes, where have you been, And it says, well, I'm your baby sister. Three years difference, best friends. They had, at this point, they were living in different states at the time. They called each other all the time. Her soulmate was her sister. It reminds me of another one where this woman then in her 70s, no, she didn't have the same question. She knew that this guy who she had dated in her 20s was indeed her soulmate. She had like a feeling about that, but she wanted to have it verified in one of these sessions. And indeed that was the case. And this man who, they were both into music, they were both singers, they were from two different countries, but in their 20s, they met and they dated, and it was really sparky and so forth. And then there was some disagreements, and there were some misunderstandings that can happen in your 20s. And then they just parted for a time. And during this time, circumstantially, they met two other people, they got married, and they had kids. They remained friends the whole time. And then there was this sense, now bringing up to when she met me in her early 70s, and we had a session, and indeed she goes into the spiritual world, and she says, yes, this fellow, my best friend, who, by the way, makes my husband nervous, is my soulmate. And so what's the deal? Why didn't it work out? Because they had, in their previous two past lives, they were indeed a couple. They were very close. They were enjoying themselves. That really great love and intensity and spirituality was very much a part of who they were. But in the second of those two past lives, they isolated themselves as the happy couple, and they really didn't need other people. They were just happy and content with themselves. It was really, everything was there in that relationship. And so the wise ones, the spirit guides, the elders in spirit said, well, okay, well, you've done that before. You've enjoyed, that lovely twosome relationship, having your partner there, and you're getting stuck. You're getting off track. So this time, yes, you can still be in each other's lives, but you have to learn some other things. And indeed, even though they get aggravated with their respective partners, they are learning different things, and they are interacting with other people and in their communities. They pretty much learned that lesson that, okay, yeah, maybe next lifetime. But again, soul has sometimes other ideas, other priorities that we need to learn. I had this one woman who was really quite psychic. And she was probably late 30s. She was kind of like socially odd. She was overweight. She felt like she was not very attractive. And she met a couple of guys on the internet dating site, but it was all really short-term sort of things. And so she was a bit frustrated, so she came in having the session with me with some of these different questions about relationships and so forth. But she also asked an unusual question. She said, when am I going to die? And I don't get too many questions like that. And it's something that even, as an astrologer, some people might be curious about that. And it's not a place that I typically like to go. But over the years, I've learned that we have, very much like these near-death experience times, there can be these portals, these doors that could open, and the possibility that might be your exit time. But then another time, 2 years, 3 years down the road, might be another door. So it's not really stuck. It's not like, fate. But so she was not so happy, as I said, and she had this unusual question asking about her own death. And so I found out in the course of things that indeed, while she got like these images, she could really, describe quite easily her past lives. She had an easy flow in her spirit life. She was close with her spirit guide. And so then at that point, after having a past life, then you have the death, and then you go into the spirit world. That's typically how things flow. And then she was there with the wise elders, and then I could ask that question. First of all, so when is she going to die? This was what she wants to know. And why does she ask that question? And the answer was, she's got a ways to go yet. Don't worry. But she wants to get through this life to get onto her next life after this one, which she knows is going to be really good. I found that very interesting, that your next life is going to be really good. The present life that she had at this point, that I met her, was a karmic payback life. And she had some stuff to pay because she, as a he, was not very nice to the women. And he, in her past life, was very judgmental about how women looked. And he had his levels. And he, in that past life, hurt several women. And so here she is right now, this life, and she's not so happy, and she is being judged. But it is the karmic mirror that she is confronting. We make our bed, we sleep in it, we plant those seeds, it comes back, karma, cause and effect. And so, but the psychic understanding that, she has to pay this off, she's not going to be so popular this time. There are these people who, she could date, and she did find this one guy who was kind of into her, through the internet. And she found out that this fellow, who they would periodically get together, was one of the women that he used in a past life. And so he was not so ready to trust in this woman. So it was kind of complex, but very interesting that, again, she was waiting to have this life finished. I'm paying off all of my bad deeds. I've been a bad boy, and hopefully, next life that she knew was already planned, and it was really going to be, quite nice, and she was looking forward to that. Let's get this one here over with. So the spirit said, nah, not so quick, not so fast. Reminds me of a variation of that theme where another woman who had a similar question, and she also was a macho man in a past life, and that she had a weight problem this lifetime because that past self made fun of fat people. And so then she had to experience that in this life. And so many times what I like to do in these spiritual sessions is not only to gather the stories, not only to understand cause and effect, but I'd like to, we have a therapeutic opportunity right now. Can we heal this? Can we cut the karma? Can we release? Can we, get things done? That's, part of the job. And so we did a healing. We asked forgiveness from that past life macho man, and said, okay, may that be done, and blessings to you. And now here, the woman present. Now, is it possible for you to lose the weight and to get into the shape that you would like? And her soul says, not yet. That wasn't enough because she had to pay a little bit more. So that's another perspective I found kind of interesting, that, as much as we'd like to clean things up and I'm sorry and so forth, it's like, no, you still have to do time. Yeah. By the way, you know that time is a dimension, right? And who here knows the 3 dimensions, according to Edgar Cayce, about our life right down here on the earth? How many? 1, 2. Okay. A few of you, but you'll find this very interesting. So imagine this sense of the cube, width, depth, space. And that's what we think as space, okay? And that's what we think sometimes as 3 dimensions. But Cayce would say that's one dimension called space. And then we have the second dimension here, and that is time. Space and time. Here I am over here. Just a second ago I was over there. That was a trick. Just a second.
So impatient, I can hardly.
She's giving it away. The third dimension of experience is patience. And some people are impatient. But that's the lesson here upon the earth. So that is interesting. I must admit, when I came across that in the 80s, that patience is a dimensional experience, I must admit it took me some years to kind of integrate that. How does that fit, and is that true, and what does that mean anyway? Except that indeed we can be impatient here upon the earth. How many of you are periodically impatient? Oh my goodness, look at all you. Well, we better hurry up. So remember earlier I was talking about the time perception issue? When we recall as spirits that we can do this and boom, in 1 second I'm over to Alpha Centauri. In spirit, yeah, we can do things right now, okay? But in the earth, these bodies, it's really slow, And then we got these 24 hours in a day. Oh, man. So patience is something that, yes, I saw all those hands. So you're learning patience upon the earth. You probably have heard about this prayer. Lord, grant me the patience and please do it now. So, any other questions? Yes, David.
Since you've been commenting on somebody wanting to get to the next life, so we could get this one out of the way, you talked about time, space, patience, with there really being no time. Have you had progressions, or have you had hypnosis session with somebody who decided what to do in this life because they made that decision based on a future life, and they were going back and setting up a life as a foundational life to get to the future life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good. Yeah. So regressions going into the past, progressions going into the future. I was very fascinated with that also when I came here in the 1980s and, getting into the Edgar Cayce thing and learning my craft as a past life regressionist. And so I did a few of those progressions. And this example of that woman who wanted to finish with this life because she knew that her next life was going to be great. So yes, there are these progressions. There is a plan for the next life, but not for that many people. I think it's relatively rare that you would have your next life already planned because you're not finished with this life. And there's a couple more things to learn in this life that will affect your future lives. But still, I was curious about that. And so I did a couple of progressions, and then people in a trance state, they said, oh yeah, here I am. It's the year 2200, and it's a bit like the Jetsons, and here we are like with the flying cars and so forth. And this is the is that wishful thinking? Is that, true? Is an imagination? I don't know. And when they described this future life, I felt like we really couldn't do anything about it or with it. It was like an interesting story. What can you do? So then, as a good little scientist, then I said, well, let's do some experiments. And so I did some progressions in our present life, and I had a series of people, and we were going to take a look at what's going to happen 6 months from now, or 1 year from now, and to progress into that. And so I did several of those because if we can have something we can test, and we will be here, let's check back in 6 months or 1 year from now, then we'll find out if it's true or not. Well, they did not come true. It was wishful thinking. It was hopes and dreams. And I think also there was a bit of manipulation from above, that says, oh, don't be messing in that direction. It's like maybe that's an area that's not so useful for you to know. So at that point, then I gave up on progressions. So there are some other things connected with the family and the family dynamics that I did get into. And it's interesting how some people, again, having their group or smaller group dynamics, and then they have those different characteristics in that past life. And then there's the death, spirit, plans. What did we learn? How are we going to resolve the karma? What are the individual missions for everyone in this particular soul group? And then how does that unfold in our present life? Really quite complex. And I'm thinking, wow, it would take like a super computer of the future to figure all of these dynamics out with the individual karma, life lessons, issues, those interactions, hopes and dreams, and then being born, here. Really complex, but fascinating, very interesting. And so, as above, so below. This is a classic occult dynamic. And there are star systems, binary stars. There are cluster stars. There are nebulas, all reflected out there. There are these huge galaxies. And all of these groupings, as well as, by the way, individual lone stars out there, all of these groupings are also reflected upon here on the earth in relationships. And there are loners, and there are the duads. I mentioned the soulmates who just wanted to be with each other, and that's good enough. But there are also the group ones, and they are in a cluster. And sometimes the cluster is like a very tight group of individual cells in spirit, which is very interesting when they describe that to me. And when they come down here to the earth, they can feel rather lonely because they're just used to this close connection. And that's what they want. They want that same spiritual dynamic that they had up there. And so, yeah, how close can we get? And sometimes that creates some problems in our everyday world down here. Even though there are more and more people who are aware of polyamory, and who does not know what polyamory is? Okay. Poly meaning many, amor, love. You can love many at the same time. Oftentimes it's just a couple, and oftentimes also that's legislated. That's that's how it's supposed to be. And until recently, it had to be specific legislation of who could couple. But on a spiritual level, I mean, again, there's all the options and freedom and so forth. And so people who are close to this cluster group in spirit, they are open to polyamory, and they could love more than one person at a time. And then some people who could have like a trio, like Carl Jung. He was involved with it as a trio. Other famous people too. And because of the rules we have down here, however, people who might be open to a polyamorous relationship and love, within in a group, there's a lot of pressure against that, by the way. But in spirit, there's not. But also in spirit, it's more androgynous. It's not, there are like tendencies towards the masculine or the feminine, but really it's both or none or beyond, so it's really quite open. Here in the spiritual world, someone who would really like to love many people can turn into a serial monogamist, and they'll get divorced 7 times, but they've loved many people. But they stretch it out over a period of time. And I guess that's okay. That's within the law. But perhaps if you gave people more freedom, they might practice more of like what their soul group does up above. Now there's another group of people who have not had too many lifetimes here upon the earth. They, however, had other experiences on other interdimensional places, on other planets, and some of those planets were quite civilized. They were more advanced than ours, if you can believe that. And then when they're incarnated down here, they oftentimes say, it's rather slow. They don't seem to be so clever down here. And frustrations and so forth, and not seeming to fit in, and they feel like an oddball or a cast out, or like things are just primitive, and they don't really fit in. That's another thing. They're called, from the Michael Newton perspective, hybrid souls. They have been attached to this present Earth, sometimes because they have evolved from that other planet, and it's time to do something else, to have another experience, and then they come to this Earth already with experiences, but not earthly experiences. And so, yeah, they can interact, they can do things, but they're not going to be so human. But they might be the geniuses. They might be those with special perspectives. They will probably see things a bit more different than we mortals, But they oftentimes also have a bit of a difficult time here, and they feel misunderstood. They feel a little bit odd, and they miss something. What they, of course, really miss is their home, their spiritual family. They're trying their best, but it's sometimes not so easy for some people. I haven't done too many sessions with autistic people or people upon the autism spectrum, but I'm inclined to think that they may be from this other advanced civilization, and they're used to getting input in a very different way than we with our five senses. I don't know that. I haven't had enough experience with it, but it's just an idea. Any other answers? Yes.
I got the idea of young.
Oh yes, young souls. Yeah. Michael Newton had a suspicion that there was a majority of young souls upon the earth. Think so? And very much like we have young kids, we have elementary school kids, we've got teenagers, we've got adults, we've got the elderly. Also in the spirit world, there are these young souls, middle souls, older souls, and it's just a natural, way of life, eternally, everywhere. And I came across this one lady over in Europe, and she booked the typical 2 sessions, one on each day. The first one would be more of a past life regression to find out, where you came from, and then the next day we would explore more about the life between life, and then get a larger perspective of things. So we have our session. And then she goes back to the 1800s when she just made a mistake after a mistake, and she meant well, but she was rather naive. And she trusted the wrong people, and then she got into trouble, and then got into jail. It was pretty much of a mess. And so ended up quite unhappy, relatively young, and she dies probably maybe age 40, and just thinking like, wow, that was a mess. And she goes into a spirit, contacts her spirit guide, who says, oh man, that was a really difficult first life. I think I need to incarnate with you to help you. And indeed she did. And that was her mother, this life. And her mother was they lived in a small village, and her mother was the most popular mother in the village. She would bring her little friends over, and her mother would bake and talk and share. Really an awesome person. And this was, the mother showing this person, my client, second lifetime, by the way. This is how you do it. These are some things to know. This is how to treat people. This is how to have a grounded sense of self. These are some precepts to help you to make it in the world. There's a thing called gravity here too. All the rules and lessons of being in the third dimension, and so then she said, "Oh, okay, got it. Which we just discussed was my first life. I'm now on my second life. I'm going to cancel tomorrow. It's done. Had the past life, had the spiritual perspective. I got it. Thank you. See ya." Yes, Bob.
Makes a question on the spirit guide, talking about the spirit guide.
Mm-hmm.
Does your spirit guide remain constant through reincarnations?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, spirit guides, oftentimes we all have spirit guides, also called guardian angels, soul guides, those wise ones who, again, accompany us and in our spiritual groups. In the spiritual world, they're also guiding, advising, sharing, and so forth. So yes, we all have those, and then there are, as we individuals, as we grow, as we mature, then we may not need them as much, and we will periodically check in like a coach. you know. And then I've had a few times, which is really quite awesome, within the session, where they have like a graduation ceremony. And they say, I'm now kind of equal or friends to my soul guide. And so I'm going to ask for my next guide, who is of a higher, wiser perspective, or someone who specializes in something I'm particularly interested in. And so a wonderful experience of having grown, having developed, having matured, and gone to a place where now they're friends, they're buddies, you know, thank you, still love you, and, you know, going off on their own. I have come across very few who had come to the point where they really didn't need a soul guide anymore. Periodically, they would connect and talk with the great council, the elders, and then get the big picture of, you know, what's the next step in my personal evolution and so forth. And that's pretty awesome too. A lot of energy, a lot of spirit, a lot of tears happening with these things, like that sense of home that we talked about, like, oh man, I really missed that. Sometimes with the elders, they really go, ah, wow, you know. One extra thing though about the young souls, Michael Newton had talked about the spectrum and the colors of the spectrum, starting off with red, orange, yellow, green, light blue, dark blue, purple, as these were the spread of the growth of the souls. And you start off, though, as real young in white, the white color, before you get to the red. And this was just an indicator that, you know, kind of where you were at in your spiritual development as a soul. And the interesting thing here is that once they go into all of these levels of spirituality and consciousness and wisdom, they after purple, they go to white. The great circle again. Yeah. But I have found that sometimes this particular measurement is not the same, you know, and some people don't get any colors. I don't know, you know, because I always ask, you know, what is your soul like? Where are you at? And so forth. Many people are curious about that, of course. And sometimes it's like, here's the little ball, mid-sized ball, and a big ball, you know. But it's basically the same thing. You know, you're small, medium, large. You know, you're older or younger. And that's just another measurement of, you know, how to gauge how old you are, which is again very interesting. I had one soul who asked that question, you know, like, you know, how old am I? And then she had a couple of past lives, you know, learned a couple of different things in those past lives, and then she, you know, has the death, going into the spirit world, connecting with her spirit guide, who was really rather awesome, who was like vibrating. And then she here with her spirit guide, and she was jumping around, and she was excited. And he says, "You are a little rascal," you know. And at that point, we knew, you know, the answer to her question. She's a young soul. Didn't have to ask, "Are you a young soul?"
Do you have any experience with somebody who either in the pre-planning or in the current life, in pre-planning or in the current life, basically was doing Plan B? Because we have, you know, we can plan all of this stuff with our soulmates, but there's always free choice. And, you know, it's like, oh, sorry, I was at the movies that day, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right. You know, finding themselves working out Plan B. And yes, I have. I've come across that from time to time, where they mixed up their signals. This time that they had, you know, they were supposed to be together for a long period of time, but then they got really stubborn. They got into some arguments, and they said, "Oh, forget you," you know. and they were supposed to be learning, by the way, patience, you know. and then went on to another partner, and it was indeed said that this was Plan B. This was not your primary partner, and so there was always this sense that this case I'm thinking about in particular, this woman, had this longing for the one that got away from that first marriage. And, you know, I was so immature, I jumped to conclusions. I'm sorry, I wish it could have happened another way. But it was okay with Plan B. It was, you know, they had a good relationship, but it wasn't like the spark from that first one. And indeed, in the session, they found out that, yep, that was your first choice. But there is good to have a backup plan, and there's probably a backup plan for all of us. And thank goodness for that, too. We get another chance. Or sometimes, you know, people having a love connection, a deep love, but then something goes awry, you know, and then they part, but then they can come back together. And so then it's like, oh, you know, try again. You know, we can always have yet another chance. And that's also lovely to see that. Yes, Skip.
Stephen, I want to go back and kind of fine-tune the verse you shared about Jesus that said, unless you come as a child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
I've been explained in church or in my Christian walk that, oh, well, children are innocent. They hadn't had as much time to sin yet. They haven't conformed to the pattern of this world yet. Those were the reasonings. And then a book by Brendan Manning, Ragamuffin Gospel, he says, no, that's not right. It's children are, they don't expect anything. They know their position in the world, that they haven't earned anything yet. And that's why children are more acceptable in the kingdom of heaven. Could you just fine-tune what you think a child has that qualifies them for the good kingdom of heaven?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. Again, you know, some nice examples of some top-down, you know, theology and ways to understand it, as well as, you know, a couple of different ways that, you know, there's these individual interpretations and translations, you know, of, you know, be ye converted or turned to be like a child. And it's like, oh yeah, you know, follow the rules, be a good little boy, girl, and so forth. And that is getting, I think, a little bit too stuck on what we think is the truth right here, right now. And that gets many people into trouble. So my feeling is that, as I said, if you ask young children, and there's this special time between they start to communicate, they can use the language, and then they go to school. this special little time here where then, yeah, you can communicate and you can ask all kinds of things, including spiritual wisdom. You know, asking those young innocent children about past lives. What did you do? Oh, have you met some angels? They talk about invisible friends, right? I mean, I think they're truly more tuned in than we as adults, after especially indoctrination, education, religious and family planning. And then we kind of forget, or we get stuck, and it's a long time that we don't get it. I've had also a couple of sessions of past life ministers who, after they died, they were afraid of being judged, and they hid out. Not like the little the young girl in Wyoming, but they hid from the Lord, and after a while they figured out that's not the Lord. You know, that which I was afraid of, you know, is not the truth. But it took them a while, and that shows the power of indoctrination, that even after death, one can still be like stuck being a good boy, good girl, obedient child, whatever. So young children, especially in that sense of they're curious, they're open, they're quick to laugh, the heart is open, and every single person here is a delight. And who are you? And who are you? You know, and ready to interact. I mean, that, I think, is what Jesus was talking about, you know, of just being open and accepting and loving and being right here, right now. And yeah, that's going to get you into heaven.
So now that I'm this old, closed-minded man, how can I return to that child? What are some things I can do to return to that childhood? I'll buy the book after.
Look into my eyes. That inner child, that spark is truly there and alive in every single one of us. And it's just a matter of getting in touch with it. And sometimes it takes a near death to do it. Sometimes you can do it through some of these sessions. Sometimes you can have a mystical experience, you know, just being touched by a beautiful sunset. But the affirmations, you know, that I, you know, accept and I invite that innocent child within me. I am a spirit. I am a son or daughter of God. And yes, I let that, I want that, I invite that again into my life. To be, again, innocent as a child, because I want to be connected with spirit. And so then I end this by saying, Namaste, the spirit within me bows to the spirit within you. Thank you.
Namaste.